Hi everybody, my name's Peter and this is just a quick little run through of Photoshop. I'm going to look at four different things, and that is the workspace of Photoshop, layers, um, opening and creating documents, and the selection tools. Okay, to get started, this is the Photoshop workspace. Over on the left here you'll see a tools palette, and this has a series of different tools in it that all obviously have different functions. Now if you look closely you'll see a little arrow in the corner of some of the tools, and if I click and hold on this arrow, another little sub menu comes out and I can toggle between different tools within these sub menus, which grouped together they have a similar function, but they have particular functions for whatever that function is. Okay, now down at the bottom of the tools palette you'll notice that there's these two squares, and now this square here, that one is called the foreground color, and this one here behind it obviously is called the background color. So if I use any of these tools like a pen or a paintbrush, it's going to use the foreground color, blue. If I wanted to change that, I can swap it with the background color by clicking those little arrows, or I can click on it and I can select any color on this color picker chart. So that's the tools palette. Now moving across, we've got across the top here, like most other programs, we've got a series of menus. We've got the Photoshop menu, and the first one I'll show you here is in Preferences. Under Preferences you'll see Units and Rulers, and when I open Units and Rulers, up the top here we've got the Rulers setting. Sometimes you might find it's set to pickers or points, which can be confusing because I don't know how to go and measure in pickers or points out in the real world. I use millimeters or centimeters, so you can change that to millimeters so that these rulers will appear in millimeters, and if you are so inclined you can change it to centimeters or inches, depending on what's your preference. Now travelling further on this menu heading, we've got the File menu, which is just like most other programs. You can open a new document, open an existing document, you can open recent documents, you can close, save as, all those kinds of things. Now if you look over on the side of this menu, you've got these little symbols and letters. Now what they are is they are shortcuts, so you can use these different symbols and letters on your keyboard to do these functions. This is an Apple computer, so this button, this symbol here is Apple's version of Command or Control, I think. But you'll see on a Windows computer, if you're using a Windows computer, that will be different. It'll say Control N or Command N, whatever it comes up with. Going over to the Edit menu, one thing I'd like to show you is you've got, just like most other edit menus in other programs, you've got Copy. So you'll see here it's got your Command C as the shortcut, and then you've got Paste, which is Command V. So I started out using these shortcuts here, and then as I start using other functions within Photoshop or other programs, I've looked at these shortcuts and realized I don't have to keep going back to this menu. If I just want to undo something, I can just look at that shortcut and remember it and use that. Carrying further, we've got the image file menu, which has different things that you can do to the image that's on the screen. Change the color modes, adjust the color variances. You've got these auto preset commands to do. You can change the size, you can rotate it, and so on. Now further along we've got the layers menu, which has different functions and commands which will control the layers palette, which I'll go through in just a tick. And then you've got the type menu, which involves manipulating different text commands and so on. The select menu, now selecting objects in Photoshop or areas is one of the most fundamental parts of Photoshop, and I'll go through that when I talk about selection tools. You've got a filters menu, so you can add filters and effects to your image. You've got a 3D menu, which is a new function to Photoshop, and I'm not familiar with it, so I'm afraid I can't go through that with you. You've got your view menu, which deals with how you view your file on the screen. So you can do things like zoom in, zoom out, fit it onto the screen. And again, if you look at these little shortcuts, you don't have to keep going back to the menus. You can just press Command plus to zoom in, Command minus to zoom out, and Command 0 to fit the image to the screen. The window menu. Now this menu here involves all these different palettes here. You can see these palettes over on the side here. You could just imagine if I had every single one of these palettes open on my screen, it would get a bit cluttered and a bit difficult to work through your image if you had these all over your work area. So you can go into this menu here and untick those palettes to get rid of them and get them out of your way. Okay, now over on the right hand side, as I just mentioned, you've got all your palettes arranged in this little column here. We've got one poking out there, I'll just get rid of him. But basically you can open palettes. I'll just open these two that I just had, and you can manage them over in this column over here, rather than having them scattered all over your workspace. Now in these palettes you'll notice there's different tabs. So this here is one whole palette. This here is another palette because it's got more tabs up the top here, and you can click through those tabs to bring up the palette that you wish to work with. Okay, now the final part of the workspace, I guess, which is one of the important ones, is your window pane where your image exists. And basically whatever size your image is, it will fill up this whole area here for you to work in. So if I were to zoom in on this portrait oriented image, you'll notice it'll start to take up that whole area. But because it's not the same shape rectangle, obviously when it's fit to page you've got these spaces blank, which is okay. Now down the bottom you'll also see here this document semicolon, and it'll show you value in megabytes or kilobytes, and that's telling you how large the image is that you're working on. And then over here it'll show you the size of the document. Currently I'm working at 33% of the actual document size. Okay, so that's the workspace for Photoshop. Next thing I'd like to show you is the layers. Now Photoshop works in layers, and that's one of the interesting features which will help you do the things that you need to do. Now when you open a document, you'll only see one layer usually if it hasn't been opened in Photoshop before. So I'll just close this file down and I'll reopen it by finding it as you would with any other program. So I've just opened a JPEG, which is this photo of this penguin, and this is what's come up in my layers palette. It's just one single layer with a padlock on it. So while that padlock is there, it won't let me do anything to that layer. So the first thing that I do is I go up to this little menu, drop down menu here, and I duplicate that layer. So now you can see I've got two layers and one of them doesn't have a padlock on there, so I can do things to that layer. Now I'm going to create a new layer, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this bucket tool and the foreground color, which is blue, and I'm just going to completely fill in that whole layer. The reason I'm doing that is because I want to show you the eye tool. So this little icon will allow different layers to be visible or switch the visibility off. So I've just switched that blue layer off, so now I can see the penguin, but I can't do anything to that layer with the penguin on it. The reason being is because I've still got the blue layer highlighted. I need to move that highlight down to background copy, and now you can see that I can do things to this layer with the penguin on it. The other interesting thing with these layers is you can also pick up a layer. So I click and hold layer 1, I can drag it behind the penguin, so as that now the penguin is the top layer. It's the layer which I can see above the blue layer. Another interesting feature also, while I've got that top blue layer selected, I can change its opacity with this value up here. And so now, because the blue layer is on top and it's at 48% opacity, you can now see through the blue layer to the layer beneath it, which is the penguin. Okay, so that's how layers work. Now in the file menu you can create a new document, you can open an existing document, or you can open recent documents. These are documents that I've had open recently. Generally you'll usually work with existing documents, which are photos. Rarely you will create a new document. Sometimes you do, but when you're working with photos, you're usually opening existing documents. So just like Microsoft Word or other programs, you basically find your document on your computer and you simply open it. So the last thing that I'd like to show you in this presentation is selecting and the selecting tools. So basically how Photoshop works is that you can select different areas and you'll see this marquee tool, these dotted lines which are moving, that's called a marquee tool. I've selected that area in the oval, and basically whatever I do will only happen in that selected area. So I've picked the brush tool, and if you see what happens here, I'm using the brush tool to draw lines, but they only occur inside that selected area. Okay, so that's the whole idea behind selecting areas in Photoshop. Now, this first selection tool, you've got the rectangular marquee tool, so I can select rectangular or square areas, if I hold down Shift when I'm selecting, it will always be a square with equal sides. And the same if I were to select that elliptical marquee tool, I can select ovals shapes, but then if I hold down the Shift key while I do it, it always makes an equal circle with an equal X and Y diameter. The next tool down is the lasso tool. Now I can use this tool if I don't want to have a square area or a circular area, I can just draw around the area which I want to select. In this case it's the penguin's head. And as you can see there, I've roughly drawn around the penguin's head, and I can go back and fine-tune these little areas if I want to, if I had the time to go and do that, or I can use the sub-tools and select this magnetic lasso tool, which will basically follow around these different lines where the color contrasts occur, and it will intuitively try to select the path that it thinks that I'm trying to make it follow. And so there you can see it's kind of stuck with that shape of the penguin's head as I wanted it to do. Okay, now what I want to do next is I'm going to copy that penguin's head and paste it on a new layer. So what I'll do now is go to the edit menu, and I can either select copy if I haven't used the shortcut. So now I've just copied that penguin's head. It's now sitting in thin air or the clipboard within Photoshop. I'll create a new layer on the layers palette over here, and I'll just title it Penguin's Head. And so now that I've got the new layer selected over here, if I go to edit and paste, what was sort of copied into thin air, or the clipboard as I called it, can now be pasted onto the new layer. So if I switch off the visibility of the penguin layer, you'll see just the penguin's head on there. Okay, now the other lasso tool is the polygon lasso tool. So this one will basically make a shape using straight edges between different points. Just in case if I wanted to select something that has straight edges but it's not a square, I can use this tool to try and get those shapes in, because sometimes you want a straight edge and not that freehand looking edge. Now the next tool in the palette here, this is the last selection tool. This is called the Magic Wand tool. Now the way the Magic Wand tool works is when you click the Magic Wand onto a pixel, it will look for all the pixels next to it that are similar in color value to that pixel. So I'll click on this black area and it's picked all the other pixels next to that black pixel which are similar in color. So if I click on this orange part, again it's picked all of the pixels next to it which are similar to the value of that pixel that I clicked on. But as you'll notice, it hasn't picked all of those orange pixels. That is because if we go up here, we have this little preset called tolerance. So basically each color has a different numerical value, and what I've done here is picked an orange numerical value, and it's picked all of the other pixels within 15 pixels of that value. And if I wanted to bring that up to 30 and I click on that orange part again, it will start to have a bit more of a tolerance as to which pixels, so it'll won't just go for the light orange, it'll go for all the oranges in there. Now if I were to pick up on one of these lighter pixels, that grey white sort of pixels, because the tolerance is quite high, all of these colours which were next to the pixel are similar within a tolerance of 30. So for instance, if I just wanted to pick this grey area on the door, I could go back up here and I can drop that tolerance down to say 5, and if I click on that grey area again, instead of picking all of these areas, it's just picked up within a smaller tolerance, that grey. If I hold down shift, it will remember the bits that's already selected, and if I click on another area while still holding down shift, slowly I can pick out just this grey background area, and just clicking to get rid of all these pixels that it's missed. Eventually you'll get the area based on that color value that you were after. Now the other thing with selecting is, just say you wanted to select a different area and get rid of this selection that you don't want anymore, you can go up to the select menu and you can click deselect, or you can use the shortcut over here, and that gets rid of the selection, so you can start selecting things again. Now you'll notice that when I'm clicking in different areas, the old selection has gone away, unlike the time before when it stayed there. If I press and hold the shift key while I click select, it remembers all the pixels that I've got selected and then allows me to add new ones to the selection. Okay, so that's probably first step for Photoshop. We looked at the tools for selecting different areas, different types of selecting tools. We looked at layers, and we looked at the overall workspace of Photoshop. The next step is to, I guess, look at what different tools do in Photoshop to do the things that you want to do. So I hope that was helpful. My name's been Peter, and it still will be even after this video is over. Thank you.